Ah, look who just rewrote the entire playbook with 2 syllables. Hello to the masters of unbothered energy, the architects of silence, the ones who learned that sometimes the most devastating weapon in your arsenal isn't a paragraph, isn't a comeback, isn't even a carefully crafted response. It's a single word. Okay. 2 letters that somehow collapsed their entire empire, shattered their confidence, and left them staring at their phone at 3 a.m., wondering what the actual hell just happened. They threw everything at you, didn't they? The guilt trips, the manipulations, the theatrical performances designed to pull you back in, the carefully constructed narratives meant to make you react, to make you explain, to make you fight. And you just said okay. Not okay, but let me explain. Not okay, however. Not okay, I understand, but just okay. Period. End of transmission. Conversation terminated. And somehow, that single word did more damage to their reputation than any argument ever could. You want to know why they're spiraling right now? Because you broke the script. You didn't give them the reaction they rehearsed for. You didn't give them the drama they needed to paint themselves as the victim. You didn't give them the emotional fuel they've been harvesting from you for months, maybe years. You just agreed. You said okay. And in doing so, you revealed something they spent their entire existence trying to hide. That they need your reaction more than you need their respect. That their power was always borrowed from your willingness to engage. That every argument, every manipulation, every guilt trip was just them begging you to prove they still mattered. And when you said okay, you stopped begging, you stopped proving, you stopped playing, you became unreachable. And that is what destroyed them. Because now they're left holding a script with no actor, a stage with no audience, a performance with no applause. Just them screaming into the void, while you walked away with 2 syllables and 0 fucks left to give. Let's rewind to the moment it happened, shall we? They came at you with that energy, that tone, that carefully crafted message designed to trigger you, to pull you into their circus, to make you dance one more time for their amusement. Maybe it was a text, maybe it was a confrontation, maybe it was some passive-aggressive comment in a group chat meant to bait you into defending yourself. They set the trap, laid out the bait, and sat back waiting for you to take it. They were so confident, so sure, that this time you'd snap. This time you'd write the paragraph. This time you'd explain yourself, defend your choices, justify your existence to people who never deserved access to your truth in the first place. But instead, you looked at their message. You read every word. You felt the manipulation dripping through the screen. You recognized the game. You saw the puppet strings. And you replied with the most soul-crushing, empire-destroying, reputation-shattering response in human history. Okay. Not okay with a question mark. Not okay with dramatic ellipses, just okay, full stop, and then silence. Beautiful, deafening, unbothered silence. No explanation, no justification, no emotional investment, just acknowledgement and exit. And that's when their world started crumbling. You see, what you did in that moment, it wasn't passive, it wasn't weak, it wasn't avoidance. It was the most violent act of psychological warfare you could have possibly deployed. Because okay, from someone who used to care, from someone who used to fight back, from someone who used to explain and defend and justify, that okay translates to something far more devastating. It translates to, I hear you, and I don't care. It translates to, your opinion no longer has value in my reality. It translates to, I've already moved on mentally, and you're just now realizing it. They were expecting war, and you gave them indifference. They were expecting emotion, and you gave them void. They were expecting the old version of you, the one who cared about their approval. And instead they met someone who had already buried that version and moved on without a funeral. The shock of it, the sheer audacity of your unbothered energy, It short-circuited their entire system. They didn't know how to process it. How do you manipulate someone who won't engage? How do you guilt someone who won't absorb it? How do you control someone who won't react? You can't. And that realization hit them like a freight train made of karma and consequence. Now let's talk about what happened next, because this is where it gets beautiful, where the destruction really starts to unfold like a slow-motion car crash they can't look away from. They tried again, didn't they? They sent another message, longer this time, more emotional, more desperate. They tried to escalate, tried to poke harder, tried to find the button that used to work. They asked why you were being like this, accused you of being cold, of changing, of not caring anymore. They threw guilt, they threw history, they threw every manipulation tactic in their playbook. And you either ignored it completely or hit them with another, okay. Maybe you added, thanks for letting me know. Maybe you went with, understood. But the energy remained the same. Unbothered, unmoved, unavailable. And that's when they started panicking, because they realized they had lost their power. Not because you took it from them, but because you simply stopped giving it to them. The control they thought they had over your emotions, over your time, over your peace, it evaporated the moment you refused to play. And when manipulators lose control, they don't just get angry. They get desperate. They start making mistakes. They start showing their true colors to everyone watching. Here's what they didn't calculate in their little manipulation equation. When you say okay and walk away, you're not just ending the conversation with them. You're forcing them to have a conversation with themselves. You're leaving them alone with their own thoughts, their own conscience, their own reflection. And for people who've built their entire identity on controlling others, on being right, on winning arguments, that silence is torture. They start replaying the interaction in their head. They start questioning themselves. They start obsessing over what okay really meant. Was it sarcasm? Was it genuine? Was it defeat? Was it victory? They can't tell, and that ambiguity, that uncertainty, it eats them alive. They check their phone constantly. They refresh the conversation. They tell themselves they don't care, but they're checking to see if you've said anything else. They're waiting for you to come back, to re-engage, to give them the satisfaction of knowing they still affect you. But you don't. You've moved on. You're living your life, building your peace, focusing on your own growth, while they're stuck in a mental prison of their own making, analyzing 2 syllables like it's the Rosetta Stone of their downfall. And everyone around them can see it. They can see the obsession, the desperation, the unraveling. And that's how your simple okay starts destroying their reputation without you saying another word. Because here's the thing about reputation. It's not built by what you say about yourself. It's built by how you carry yourself when others try to tear you down. And when people watch you respond to chaos with calm, to manipulation with indifference, to attacks with, okay, they start seeing you differently. They see strength. They see maturity. They see someone who's genuinely moved past the drama. But when they watch your opponent lose their mind over being ignored, when they see them become obsessive, vindictive, desperate for a reaction, their reputation starts cracking. People start asking questions. Why are they so pressed? Why can't they let it go? Why do they care so much about someone who clearly doesn't care about them? The more they push, the more they expose themselves. The more they try to paint you as the villain, the more they reveal themselves as the aggressor. Because you're not out here writing paragraphs about them. You're not making posts. You're not telling your side of the story. You're just existing, peacefully, successfully, unbothered. And that contrast, that stark difference between your peace and their chaos, it tells everyone watching exactly who was the problem all along. Your silence becomes the loudest testimony. Your okay becomes the most damaging evidence. You didn't destroy their reputation with words. You destroyed it by refusing to participate in the theater they needed to maintain their image. Let's go deeper into the psychology of what's happening here, because this isn't just about one interaction. This is about you finally understanding a truth that most people never learn. The people who need your reaction the most are the ones who deserve it the least. Think about it. Why do they need you to engage? Why do they need you to argue? Why do they need you to explain yourself? Because your emotional investment validates their existence. Your anger proves they still matter. Your defense proves they still have power. Your paragraph proves they still have control. But the moment you say okay and detach, you remove all of that validation. You take away their significance in your life. You demote them from main character to background noise. And for people whose entire sense of self is built on their ability to affect others, that demotion is worse than death. It's erasure. It's irrelevance. It's the realization that they no longer matter enough to warrant your emotional energy. And they can feel it. They can feel themselves becoming nothing in your world. They can feel the shift from someone I care about to someone who exists. And that feeling, that awareness of their own insignificance in your life, it drives them insane. It makes them act out. It makes them desperate. It makes them prove to everyone else exactly why you said okay and walked away. Now, let's address the beautiful aftermath, the part where you get to watch from a distance as everything unfolds without your involvement. They start talking about you, don't they? To mutual friends, to anyone who will listen. They craft narratives, they twist stories, they paint themselves as the victim of your coldness. But here's the funny thing. The more they talk, the more desperate they sound. The more they explain, the more guilty they appear. Because you're not talking. You're not defending. You're not even acknowledging their existence. And that silence, that refusal to engage with their narrative, it makes people question them. If they were really so wrong, why can't they just move on? Why are they still talking about someone who clearly isn't talking about them? Your silence creates doubt in their story. Your peace creates suspicion about their version of events. And slowly, person by person, people start seeing through it. They start seeing the obsession, the bitterness, the inability to let go. Meanwhile, you're over here thriving. You're working on yourself. You're building. You're growing. You're surrounded by people who value you. You're creating the life they told you you'd never have. And every time someone sees you winning while they're still complaining, your reputation grows stronger while theirs crumbles further. You didn't have to say a word. You didn't have to defend yourself. You just had to be proof that you've moved on. And that proof, that living evidence of your growth, it speaks louder than any argument ever could. Here's what makes this whole thing even more satisfying. They thought okay meant you gave up. They thought it meant they won. They celebrated your silence as surrender. They told themselves, and probably others, that you finally admitted they were right. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't comprehend in their desperate need for validation, is that okay wasn't agreement. It was dismissal. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It wasn't weakness. It was the strongest move you could have possibly made, because you didn't give them what they wanted. You gave them what they deserved. Nothing. No energy. No emotion. No explanation. Just a polite acknowledgement that you heard them and chose not to care. And now they're living with the consequences of that choice. They're living with the reality that they lost someone who actually cared, someone who actually tried, someone who actually invested time and energy into the relationship, whether it was friendship, family, or romance. And they lost that person not because of a big fight, not because of a dramatic ending, but because they pushed too far and you simply said okay and walked away. And that's the part that haunts them, the casualness of it. The ease with which you let go, the fact that you didn't even think they were worth fighting for anymore. That realization that they weren't important enough for your anger, that's what's destroying them from the inside out. Let's talk about the power dynamics that just shifted completely in your favor. Before this moment, before you said, okay, they held cards. They could guilt you. They could manipulate your kindness. They could weaponize your empathy. They knew exactly which buttons to push to get you to react, to get you to explain, to get you to prove yourself. But the moment you said, okay, you took all those cards out of their hand. You made their tactics obsolete. You rendered their manipulation powerless. Because manipulation only works on people who care about the manipulator's opinion. Guilt only works on people who value the relationship. Emotional blackmail only works on people who are still emotionally invested. And you divested. You pulled your energy out of their market completely. You withdrew your emotional currency from their bank. And now they're standing there with worthless weapons, trying to fight someone who's no longer in the arena. They're throwing punches at a ghost. They're arguing with a memory. Because the person they knew, the person who used to care what they thought, that person is gone. And in their place stands someone who's learned the most dangerous lesson of all. That not everyone deserves your energy. That not every battle deserves to be fought. That sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Or in your case, just okay. And that lesson, that evolution, it's made you untouchable. Not because you're hiding or running, but because you've genuinely transcended the need for their approval, their understanding, or their validation. Now we need to discuss something crucial that's happening beneath the surface of all this. Your okay didn't just affect them, it changed you. It marked a transformation, a moment where you finally chose yourself over keeping the peace, where you finally prioritized your own mental health over their emotional needs, where you finally recognized that some people don't deserve the gift of your explanation. And that choice, that moment of self-respect, it rippled through every area of your life. Because once you learn to say, okay, and walk away from one manipulator, you start seeing manipulation everywhere. You start recognizing the patterns in other relationships. You start understanding which people drain you and which ones fill you. You start setting boundaries without guilt. You start valuing your time differently. You start building a life around people who don't need to be managed, who don't require constant emotional labor, who don't demand that you shrink yourself to make them comfortable. You start attracting different energy because you're operating on a different frequency. The frequency of someone who knows their worth. The frequency of someone who won't tolerate disrespect disguised as love. The frequency of someone who's done explaining themselves to people who were never trying to understand. And everyone can feel that shift. The right people are drawn to it. The wrong people are repelled by it. And suddenly your life starts looking completely different, not because you changed everything, but because you changed one thing. You changed your willingness to engage with energy that doesn't serve you. Let's address the elephant in the room that nobody talks about when it comes to situations like this. The guilt. Oh, the guilt. Because even though you know you did the right thing, even though you know they pushed you to this point, there's still a part of you that feels bad, isn't there? A part that wonders if you were too cold, too harsh, too final with that okay. A part that questions whether you should have explained more, defended yourself better, given them another chance. Let me destroy that guilt right now. You gave them chances, multiple chances. You explained yourself countless times before this. You communicated your boundaries, your feelings, your needs, and they ignored every single one. They didn't push you to okay by accident. They pushed you there through consistent disrespect, manipulation, and disregard for your well-being. Your okay wasn't cruel. It was the natural consequence of their actions. It was the final boundary you set after they violated every other one. And the fact that they're upset about it, that's not proof that you were wrong. That's proof that they took your previous patience for granted. They got comfortable with your discomfort. They got used to your willingness to absorb their chaos. And when you finally stopped absorbing it, when you finally deflected it with a simple, okay, they panicked. because they lost their emotional dumping ground. They lost their validation dispenser. They lost the one person who was still willing to tolerate their behavior. And that's not your problem anymore. That's their consequence to live with. Here's where the story gets really interesting, where you start seeing the long-term effects of your decision to disengage. Months pass, maybe a year, and you're living your life, genuinely moved on, genuinely at peace with your choice. You've built new friendships, new relationships, new experiences. You've grown in ways you never could have while still engaged with their drama. You've discovered parts of yourself that were suffocated in that dynamic, and then you hear about them. Through mutual friends, through social media, through the grapevine. And you know what you discover? They're still talking about you. They're still angry. They're still bitter. They're still trying to convince people that you were the problem. They're still obsessing over that moment you said okay and walked away, and you realize something profound. While you've been living, they've been stuck. While you've been growing, they've been stagnant. While you've been healing, they've been festering. Because you let go, but they couldn't. You moved on, but they refused to. Your okay freed you, but it imprisoned them. They're trapped in the past, replaying that conversation, rewriting the narrative, trying desperately to make themselves the hero of a story where everyone else sees them as the villain. And the most beautiful part? You don't even care anymore. The anger is gone. The hurt is gone. The investment is gone. When you hear their name, you don't feel anything. Not hatred, not love, not even curiosity, just nothing. And that nothing, that complete emotional neutrality, that's how you know you truly won. Not because you destroyed them, but because they no longer have the power to affect you at all. Let's talk about the lessons you've learned from this experience, the wisdom you've gained from choosing okay over explanation. You've learned that closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from your decision to stop seeking it from people who can't provide it. You've learned that you don't owe everyone your story, your reasoning, or your truth. Some people aren't equipped to handle it, and others don't deserve access to it. You've learned that peace isn't found in winning arguments. It's found in refusing to have them. You've learned that the right people will understand you without explanation, and the wrong people won't understand you, even with one. You've learned that your silence can be more powerful than your words, and your absence more valuable than your presence. You've learned that not everyone who starts a fight deserves the honor of finishing it with you. So you thought they wouldn't notice. You thought you could just slip back into the room, into their feeds, into their consciousness, wearing a completely different energy, and nobody would feel the shift in the atmosphere. But here's what actually happened. The moment you walked in, the temperature dropped, the air got thicker, conversations stuttered, and every single person who thought they had you figured out suddenly realized they were staring at a stranger. A stranger with your face, your name, your history, but absolutely none of the weakness they remembered, none of the desperation they fed on, none of the predictability they banked on. You showed up different, and it broke something in their reality that they can't fix, can't explain, can't ignore. Let me paint you the picture of what just happened in their minds. For months, maybe years, they had you cataloged, filed away in a neat little box labeled handled, predictable, controllable, broken, maybe even defeated. They knew your patterns, your reactions, your triggers, your limits. They could almost script your responses before you opened your mouth. You were the constant in their equation, the variable they never worried about because you always equaled the same result. And that gave them comfort, power, a sense of superiority that they wore like armor. But then you disappeared, not physically maybe, but energetically you withdrew, you went silent, you stopped feeding the machine, you stopped playing the game. And they genuinely believed that your absence meant you were somewhere licking your wounds, nursing your damage, maybe even regretting who you were or what you did. But that's not what happened at all. While they were busy celebrating your exit, you were in the shadows doing something they couldn't comprehend. You were shedding every single layer of who you used to be, not because you were broken, but because you finally realized you were wearing a costume designed by their expectations, their judgments, their limitations. You were performing in a play you never auditioned for, reading lines written by people who didn't even respect the story. So you stopped. You walked off stage mid-scene, and instead of collapsing like they predicted, you found yourself the real you, the untamed, unfiltered, unapologetic version they never got to meet, because you were too busy trying to be digestible, acceptable, understandable. And when that version finished cooking, when you finally stepped back into the light, you didn't come back to explain yourself or prove anything. You came back because you were ready, and that readiness radiated off you like heat off asphalt in summer. Now let's talk about the exact moment they saw you. Maybe it was a photo, maybe it was a story, maybe you walked into a room, maybe you posted something that landed on their screen. Whatever it was, it hit them like a freight train made of confusion and envy. Their first reaction wasn't admiration, it was defense, it was disbelief, it was denial. Who do they think they are? They muttered. This is fake. They whispered. They're trying too hard. They convinced themselves. Because accepting that you genuinely evolved, that you actually transformed without their permission or participation, would mean admitting they were wrong about you, wrong about themselves, wrong about the entire dynamic they thought they controlled. And nobody, absolutely nobody, wants to admit they lost control of a narrative they thought they owned, especially when the person they underestimated is now the one writing the sequel. Here's where it gets beautiful, though. You didn't change for them. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone else to spite them or prove them wrong or win them back. That's what they can't wrap their heads around. They're so used to people performing, posturing, pretending for validation, for attention, for approval, that when someone transforms authentically, it looks like witchcraft. It looks impossible. You changed because you got tired of betraying yourself. You changed because staying the same started costing more than growth ever could. You changed because silence taught you more than their voices ever did, because solitude showed you more than their presence ever revealed. You changed because you finally chose yourself with the same intensity you used to choose, keeping the peace, maintaining the connection, preserving the illusion. And that choice, that singular decision to prioritize your evolution over their comfort, rewired everything. Let me tell you what's happening in their group chats right now. They're analyzing you like you're a crime scene. Did you see them? Something's off. They're different. I don't know what it is, but it's weird. They're trading screenshots, dissecting captions, reading between lines that don't even exist because they're desperate to find the crack, the flaw, the proof that this transformation isn't real. They need it to be temporary, a phase, a mask. Because if it's permanent, if it's genuine, then they lost something they can't get back. Not you. They lost that the moment they chose to underestimate you. But they lost their sense of superiority, their feeling of control, their ability to predict and therefore manipulate. You became the unpredictable element in their otherwise stale equation. And unpredictability is the enemy of people who need to feel like they're always 10 steps ahead. And here's the part that's eating them alive. You're not explaining yourself. You're not writing long posts about your journey. You're not giving them the satisfaction of a breakdown or a breakthrough speech. You're not performing your transformation for their consumption. You just are. You exist in this new frequency without needing their validation or understanding. And that silence is louder than any monologue you could deliver. Because silence forces them to sit with their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own realizations. It forces them to question everything they thought they knew, not just about you, but about themselves. If they could change that much without us noticing, what else are we blind to? If they didn't need us to become that, what did they ever need us for? These questions are haunting them in ways they'll never admit out loud. You want to know the real psychological warfare you're unleashing right now. It's not that you became better, prettier, richer, stronger, although maybe you did become all those things. The real weapon is that you became unavailable. Not just physically or romantically or socially unavailable, but emotionally, energetically, mentally unavailable to their narratives, their judgments, their projections. You're no longer a character in their story. You're not the villain they needed to justify their victimhood. You're not the victim they needed to feel powerful. You're not the supporting role they needed to feel like the main character. You removed yourself from their script entirely and started writing your own, and that removal created a void they can't fill with anyone or anything else. Because you weren't just another person in their life, you were the mirror that showed them who they really were. And now that mirror is gone. They're left staring at walls, wondering why they suddenly look so empty. Let's get into the specifics of what they're seeing now when they look at you. They're seeing confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. They're seeing peace that doesn't need to perform itself. They're seeing boundaries that don't need to explain themselves. They're seeing someone who walks into rooms without scanning for approval, who speaks without waiting for validation, who exists without needing permission. And all of this, every single element of this new you, is completely foreign to the person they remember. The person they remember apologized for existing, shrunk to make others comfortable, dimmed their light so others wouldn't feel outshined, carried guilt that wasn't theirs, shouldered blame they didn't earn. That person is dead, and you're standing on that grave wearing flowers they could never grow. Now here's where we need to address the elephant in the room, the guilt they're trying to make you feel for changing. Oh, they're trying. You're not the same person anymore. They'll say, and they'll say it like it's an accusation, like consistency with who you used to be is somehow more valuable than growth into who you're meant to be. They'll call you fake, phony, a persona, anything to discredit your transformation because accepting it would mean accepting their failure to break you, to keep you small, to maintain the upper hand. They need you to be the villain in your own story, so they don't have to be the villain in yours. But here's your response: silence. Not because you're scared, not because you're guilty, but because people who are committed to misunderstanding you don't deserve the energy it takes to be understood. Let them build their theories. Let them craft their narratives. Let them twist your growth into whatever story helps them sleep at night. Meanwhile, you'll be busy actually living, actually growing, actually thriving in ways they can analyze but never replicate. And can we talk about how they're suddenly interested again? Funny how that works, isn't it? When you were available, accessible, predictable, they barely looked your way. They took you for granted like oxygen, necessary but unremarkable. But now that you're different, now that you're unavailable, now that you're clearly thriving without them, suddenly they're sliding back in. Suddenly they're watching your stories first. Suddenly they're liking old posts. Suddenly they're mentioning you in conversations. Suddenly they're asking mutual friends about you. This isn't love. This isn't regret. This is ego. Their ego can't handle that you evolved without them, that you became someone worth paying attention to after they stopped paying attention. They're not coming back because they miss you. They're coming back because they miss having access to you, and those are two completely different things. Here's what they're really questioning right now, and trust me, it's not just about you. They're questioning their own evolution, or lack thereof. While you were transforming, what were they doing? Staying the same, recycling the same patterns, the same relationships, the same mistakes, the same conversations, the same life. And your transformation is holding up a mirror to their stagnation, and that reflection is unbearable. Because if you could change that drastically, what's their excuse? If you could heal that deeply, why are they still bleeding? If you could break those cycles, why are they still spinning? Your growth is proof that change is possible, and that proof invalidates every excuse they've been using to stay comfortable in their dysfunction. You're not just living your life anymore, you're exposing theirs, and that's a level of threat they never prepared for. Now let's talk about the energy shift that happens when you walk into a room now. People feel it before they see you. There's a gravitational pull that didn't exist before, a magnetism that makes heads turn not because you're trying, but because you're not. You move differently. You breathe differently. You exist differently. You're not performing confidence. You're exuding it. You're not faking peace. You're embodying it. And this energy, this new frequency, it's not something you can fake or force or manufacture. It's the byproduct of real internal work, of real healing, of real shedding, of real becoming. And people who are still stuck in performance mode, still stuck in pretending, they can smell the authenticity on you like it's a threat to their facade. They can feel that you're no longer playing the game they're still trapped in. And that realization makes them simultaneously attracted to you and terrified of you. Let's address what they're saying behind your back, because we both know they're talking. They think they're better than us now. They say. They changed and forgot where they came from. They claim. Success changed them. They whisper. And here's what you need to understand about these statements. They're all projections. They're not describing you, they're describing their insecurities. Because in their minds, growth equals betrayal. Evolution equals abandonment. Transformation equals arrogance. They can't conceive of someone changing for themselves without it being a statement about everyone else. So when you show up different, they take it personally. They take it as judgment. They take it as rejection. And maybe, just maybe, they're not entirely wrong. Because your growth did reject something, it rejected their limitations, their expectations, their attempt to keep you in a box. And that rejection, that refusal to stay digestible and controllable, that's what they call arrogance, when really it's just autonomy. Here's a question for you. Do you even recognize who you used to be? Because I guarantee you, the person who started this journey, the person who existed before the silence, before the shedding, before the awakening, that person is unrecognizable now. Not because you're pretending to be someone you're not, but because you stopped pretending to be someone you weren't. You peeled back every layer that wasn't authentically yours, every belief that was implanted, every behavior that was conditioned, every response that was programmed. What's left isn't a new you, it's the real you, the uncorrupted version that existed before the world told you who to be. And this version, this raw, unfiltered, unapologetic version, this is what they're seeing now. This is what's making them question everything. Because they realize they never actually knew you. They knew the performance, the mask, the version you presented to survive their judgment. And now that the mask is off, they're meeting you for the first time, and they're not prepared for how powerful that introduction feels. Now let's get into the practical ways this transformation is manifesting in your daily life. You're saying no without guilt. You're choosing yourself without apology. You're setting boundaries without explanation. You're walking away from situations that don't serve you without looking back. You're investing in yourself without asking permission. You're celebrating your wins without dimming them for others' comfort. You're acknowledging your worth without waiting for external validation. Every single one of these actions is a revolution in a world that taught you to shrink, to settle, to sacrifice, to suffer silently. And each time you exercise this new autonomy, you're not just changing your life, you're rewriting the entire narrative of what's possible for people who've been where you've been. Here's what they didn't count on: that you'd find yourself in the darkness they thought would destroy you. They assumed isolation would break you, that silence would suffocate you, that absence would erase you. But instead, in that darkness, in that silence, in that absence, you met yourself for the first time without their interference, their input, their influence. And that meeting, that introduction to your authentic self, changed everything. Because once you know who you really are, once you taste real peace, real power, real alignment, you can never go back to pretending. You can never unsee what you've seen, unlearn what you've learned, unfeel what you've felt. You're ruined for superficiality now, ruined for performance, ruined for settling. and that ruins their plans to ever control you again. Let's talk about the specific moment they realized they lost you. Maybe it was when you stopped responding with the urgency they were used to. Maybe it was when you stopped explaining yourself in ways they could dissect. Maybe it was when you stopped showing up to battles they tried to start. Maybe it was when you stopped caring about their opinion, their judgment, their narrative. Whatever the moment was, they felt it. They felt the shift. They felt the door close. And that feeling, that realization that they no longer have access, that they no longer have influence, that they no longer matter in your world the way they thought they did, that's what's driving them insane. Because people who are used to having power over you don't know how to exist when that power is revoked. They don't know how to process being irrelevant in your story after being so central for so long. And here's the beautiful irony. They're now the ones under the microscope. They're the ones being studied, analyzed, dissected by their own guilt, their own regret, their own what-ifs. While you were under their scrutiny, they felt powerful, superior, righteous. But now that the roles have reversed, now that they're the ones being examined by the life you're living without them, they can't handle it. They can't handle being the cautionary tale in someone else's redemption story. They can't handle being the chapter you had to close to start the good part. They can't handle being the lesson instead of the teacher. And that reversal, that complete inversion of the power dynamic, that's the real transformation they're witnessing. Not just that you changed, but that you changed so much that their entire framework for understanding you became obsolete. Now let's address the fake concern they're suddenly showing. I'm worried about you, they say. You don't seem like yourself, they claim. I hope you're okay, they text. And all of this translates to one thing. I'm uncomfortable with how little control I have over you now. Their concern isn't care, it's surveillance. They want information, access, insight into what you're doing, how you're doing it, who you're doing it with. They want to find the flaw, the crack, the weakness, anything that confirms their narrative that this transformation is temporary, artificial, unsustainable. But you're not giving them anything. You're not explaining, you're not defending, you're not performing your healing for their comfort. And that refusal, that decision to keep your peace private and your process protected, that's driving them absolutely mad. Here's what's happening chemically in their brains right now. Cognitive dissonance. The person they see now doesn't match the person they remember. And their brain is working overtime to make sense of that discrepancy. Option 1. Accept that you've genuinely changed and they were wrong about you. Option 2. Convince themselves that this change is fake and they were right all along. Guess which option their ego is choosing? That's right, option 2. Because option 1 requires humility, self-reflection, accountability, things they're not equipped for. So they'll twist themselves into mental pretzels trying to discredit your growth rather than just admitting they underestimated you. And honestly, let them. Let them exhaust themselves building cases against your authenticity. Meanwhile, you'll be busy actually living authentically, and that contrast will speak louder than any defense you could offer. Now, let's talk about the people who are genuinely happy for you versus the ones who are pretending. You can feel the difference, can't you? The real ones, the ones who actually see you and celebrate you, their energy feels light, supportive, warm. They ask questions out of genuine curiosity, not interrogation. They celebrate your wins without immediately pivoting to their own struggles. They give you space to be different without needing to understand every detail of how you got there. But the fake ones, the ones who are threatened by your transformation, their energy feels heavy, probing, conditional. They compliment you, but there's a question mark at the end. They celebrate you, but there's a comparison attached. They support you, but there's an expectation embedded. You can feel them studying you, trying to figure out how to either replicate what you did or discredit it entirely. And that feeling, that energy, that's your compass. For who deserves access to this new version of you and who doesn't? Oh, look who walked in looking like revenge wrapped in skin. You absolute weapon, you glorious, unstoppable force of nature. Welcome back, or should I say, welcome to the aftermath. Because anyone still watching this, you're not the same person who started this journey. You're the plot twist they never saw coming, the upgrade they couldn't predict, the transformation they don't have the vocabulary to describe. Let's be brutally honest here. They were expecting evolution. Slow, steady, predictable growth. Maybe a new haircut. Maybe some confidence. Maybe a little glow. But what you delivered, what you became, wasn't a glow-up. It was an invasion. A hostile takeover of your own narrative. A complete demolition of every expectation they had filed away in their narrow little minds about who you were supposed to be forever. They watched you struggle. They saw you at your lowest, broken, confused, doubting everything, including your own reflection. And in those moments, in those dark, suffocating chapters of your story, they made a fatal mistake. They documented your pain like it was permanent. They screenshotted your vulnerability like it was your identity. They wrote you off like you were a finished book, a closed case, a cautionary tale they could reference whenever they needed to feel better about their own stagnation. But you were never writing an epilogue. You were planning a resurrection so violent, so complete, so utterly transformative that when you finally emerged, they couldn't even recognize the architecture of your new reality. This wasn't gradual, was it? One day you were surviving, barely holding pieces of yourself together with hope and spite. The next day, you were thriving so loudly that the entire atmosphere changed when you entered a room. It wasn't a journey they could track. It wasn't progress they could measure in increments. It was a detonation, an ambush, a surprise attack on every limiting belief they ever projected onto you. And the most beautiful part, the part that's currently eating them alive from the inside out, is that they missed it. They blinked. They looked away for one season, convinced you'd still be stuck in the same chapter they left you in, and when they looked back, you were unrecognizable, untouchable, unreachable. Let me paint you the picture they're living in right now. They're scrolling. Always scrolling. Checking your socials with the same energy they use to check on disasters, expecting wreckage, hoping for proof that you're still struggling, still the person they convinced themselves you'd always be. But instead, they find monuments, achievements, confidence that doesn't need captions. A version of you that looks like it was sculpted by trials they'll never understand and victories they'll never taste. And it's breaking something fundamental inside them. Because your glow-up wasn't just aesthetic. It wasn't just external shine. It was structural, psychological, spiritual. You rebuilt yourself from the foundation up, while they were busy building theories about your permanent brokenness. They thought they knew your capacity. They thought they had measured your limits, calculated your potential, determined your ceiling. And based on that arrogant assessment, they placed bets against you. Not out loud, of course. They're too diplomatic for that, too polite, too fake. But in the privacy of their group chats, in the safety of their whispered conversations, in the comfort of their collective delusion, they agreed. You wouldn't make it. You wouldn't heal. You wouldn't rise. You'd stay exactly where pain left you, frozen in trauma, marinating in defeat, serving as living proof that some people just don't have what it takes. Well, how's that prediction aging? How's that narrative holding up? How does it feel to be so catastrophically wrong about someone that your entire worldview has to adjust? See, here's what they fundamentally misunderstood about you. They thought your pain was your prison. They thought your struggles were your identity. They thought the lowest version of you they witnessed was the truest version, the permanent version, the only version that mattered. But pain was never your prison. It was your training ground. Your struggles weren't your identity, they were your curriculum. And that lowest version of you they saw, that wasn't your truth. That was your transformation in progress. That was the cocoon stage. That was the brutal, necessary season where everything old had to die so something unstoppable could be born. And born you were, not gradually, not slowly, not in a way they could track or control or feel comfortable observing. You emerged like an explosion, like a storm that doesn't announce itself until it's already reshaping the landscape. One moment they were watching you crawl through your darkest season, and the next moment you were flying so high they needed binoculars just to see your silhouette. That's not evolution. That's revolution. That's warfare. That's what happens when someone who was underestimated, overlooked, and written off decides to become undeniable. Your glow-up was an ambush because it operated on stealth mode. While they were busy analyzing your old chapters, you were writing new ones in a language they couldn't read. While they were gossiping about your past, you were engineering your future. While they were convinced you'd stay stuck, you were systematically dismantling every obstacle between you and your next level. You didn't announce your healing. You didn't broadcast your growth. You didn't perform your transformation for their entertainment or validation. You moved in silence. You built in private. You leveled up behind closed doors, where their opinions couldn't reach you and their doubts couldn't slow you down. And then, when you were ready, when you were solid, when you were so fundamentally transformed that there was no going back, you simply showed up. And the reveal was devastating. Not because you tried to hurt them, not because you needed revenge, but because your mere existence in this new form was a walking contradiction to every lie they told themselves about you, every judgment they made, every limit they tried to impose, every ceiling they tried to build above your head. Your presence alone shattered their entire framework of understanding. You became proof that they were wrong. And being wrong about you means confronting the possibility that they're wrong about themselves too. Let's talk about what they're feeling right now, shall we? Because this isn't just surprise. This isn't just shock. This is existential crisis disguised as curiosity. They're looking at you and experiencing cognitive dissonance so severe it's physically uncomfortable. The person they pitied is now the person they envy. The story they thought was over is now the story they can't stop reading. The life they wrote off is now the life they secretly wish they had the courage to build. And that creates a very specific kind of torture. The torture of missed opportunities. The torture of wasted time spent judging instead of growing. The torture of realizing they were spectators to greatness and they spent the whole show rooting against you. Your transformation wasn't gradual because real transformation never is. Real change doesn't happen in comfortable increments. It happens in earthquakes, in breaking points, in moments where you either evolve or dissolve. And you chose evolution with such ferocity that the old version of you didn't just fade away, it was incinerated. Completely. Permanently. Irreversibly. You didn't become a better version of who you were. You became someone entirely new. Someone they have no reference point for. Someone who operates on frequencies they can't detect and moves with strategies they can't predict. And that's what makes this an ambush. An ambush requires the element of surprise. It requires your enemy to be looking the other way, convinced of their safety, comfortable in their assumptions. And they were so comfortable, weren't they? So sure that you'd stay broken. So confident that your pain would be permanent. So convinced that they had you figured out, categorized, filed away in the box labeled people who didn't make it. But you were never in that box. You were outside of it the entire time, planning, preparing, transforming in dimensions they couldn't see because they were too busy staring at your surface. Now they're scrambling. Now they're rewriting their narratives. Now they're trying to act like they always knew you had potential, like they always believed in you, like they were rooting for you the whole time. But you remember, don't you? You remember the silence when you needed support. You remember the distance when you needed presence. You remember the judgment when you needed grace. You remember who showed up and who disappeared. You remember who celebrated your struggles and who mourned your victories. and that memory is permanent. That clarity is forever. That knowledge is power they can never take back. Your glow-up was warfare because it required strategy. It required discipline. It required you to fight battles no one saw, to overcome obstacles no one acknowledged, to survive nights no one knew about. You didn't just change, you conquered. You conquered doubt, you conquered fear, you conquered the version of yourself that believed their lies. You conquered the voice in your head that echoed their limitations. You conquered the part of you that wanted to stay small just to keep them comfortable. And each conquest, each victory, each transformation was a calculated strike against everything they said you'd never be. They wanted you to glow up on their timeline, slowly, safely, predictably, just enough to be acceptable but not enough to be threatening, just enough to be improved but not enough to be intimidating, just enough to be healed but not enough to be powerful. But you didn't consult their timeline. You didn't ask for their permission. You didn't wait for their approval. You operated on your own clock, in your own way, at your own pace, and when you finally revealed the results, it wasn't a gentle unveiling. It was a declaration of war on every low expectation they ever had. And here's the part that's truly destroying them. Your glow-up doesn't need their validation. It doesn't require their acknowledgement. It exists completely independent of their opinion. You're not glowing up for them. You're not transforming to prove them wrong. You're not rising to show them what they missed. You're doing all of this for you, because you deserve it, because you earned it, because you survived everything they said would destroy you and decided that survival wasn't enough. You wanted victory. You wanted dominance. You wanted to become so undeniably magnificent that even your enemies would have to admit, if only to themselves, that you won. Let me tell you what they see when they look at you now. They see competence where they expected chaos. They see confidence where they predicted insecurity. They see success where they forecasted failure. They see peace where they assumed permanent trauma. They see growth where they guaranteed stagnation. They see power where they promised powerlessness. They see everything they said you'd never have, never be, never achieve. And it's not just confusing to them, it's offensive. Because your transformation implies that they were wrong. And people who build their entire identity on being right, on being superior, on being the ones who can spot weakness from a mile away, they cannot handle being wrong. Your glow-up was an ambush, because ambushes are designed to overwhelm, to shock, to disable the enemy's ability to respond effectively. And that's exactly what happened. They're overwhelmed by how far you've come. They're shocked by how much you've changed. They're disabled in their ability to respond, because everything they prepared, every criticism they had ready, every judgment they wanted to deploy, it's all obsolete now. You're not the person they rehearsed their opinions about. You're someone completely different, someone they have no weapons against, because you're not fighting on their battlefield anymore. You changed the entire game. Now, let's address the narrative they're trying to build right now. They're saying you got lucky. They're saying you had help they didn't have. They're saying timing was on your side. They're saying the universe favored you. They're saying anything, everything, to avoid saying the truth that you were stronger than they gave you credit for, that you were smarter than they assumed, that you had depths they never took the time to explore, that you possessed resilience they couldn't fathom because they've never been tested the way you were tested. They'd rather rewrite reality than admit they underestimated you. They'd rather create fiction than face the fact that you outworked, outthought, and out-transformed every limitation they tried to put on you. But here's what's eating them more than anything else. It's not just that you glowed up. It's how you glowed up. With dignity, without bitterness poisoning your spirit, without revenge consuming your mind, without hatred hardening your heart. You could have become cruel. You could have become cold. You could have let their treatment of you justify treating others badly. But you didn't. You became better instead of bitter. You became powerful instead of poisonous. You became elevated instead of vindictive. And that graceful, dignified, unstoppable rise, that's the ambush they never saw coming. Because they expected you to break. Instead, you became unbreakable. Your transformation wasn't just physical, was it? Sure, you might look different. You might carry yourself differently. You might dress differently, speak differently, move through the world differently. But the real glow-up happened internally. You rewired your mind. You reconstructed your beliefs. You rebuilt your relationship with yourself. You transformed your trauma into wisdom. You converted your pain into power. You alchemied your struggles into strengths. You took everything that was meant to destroy you and used it as raw material to construct the most powerful version of yourself that's ever existed. And that's why this was warfare. War isn't pretty. War isn't comfortable. War requires sacrifice. It requires you to kill parts of yourself that no longer serve you. It requires you to burn bridges to old versions of yourself. It requires you to make choices that hurt in the moment but save you in the long run. You were at war with your own limitations. You were at war with their expectations. You were at war with the voice of doubt. You were at war with the comfort of staying small. And you won every single battle. They're watching you now with mixed emotions. Part fascination, part fear, part envy, part regret. They're fascinated by how you did it, but too proud to ask. They're afraid of what you'll become next, because if you can transform this dramatically once, you can do it again. They're envious of your freedom, your peace, your power, your presence, and they're drowning in regret. Regret for underestimating you, regret for not supporting you, regret for not being part of your story in a meaningful way, regret for choosing judgment over understanding, regret for being spectators when they could have been students. Your glow-up was an ambush because it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It came from the midnight hours where you cried and prayed and fought invisible battles. It came from the mornings you forced yourself out of bed when staying down felt easier. It came from the decisions you made in private to choose growth over comfort. It came from the conversations you had with yourself where you rewrote limiting beliefs. It came from the courage you summoned to walk away from people and situations that felt familiar but were fundamentally toxic. It accumulated in silence, in darkness, in spaces they couldn't see, until it reached critical mass and exploded into undeniable visibility. Now they want access. Now they want proximity. Now they want to be associated with your success. Now they want to claim they always knew you'd make it. Now they want to rewrite history and pretend they were supportive when you remember the truth of who showed up and who vanished, the truth of who celebrated and who sabotaged, the truth of who believed and who betrayed, and you're under no obligation to let them revise the narrative. You're under no obligation to welcome back people who abandoned you when you needed them most. You're under no obligation to make them comfortable with your transformation. Let's talk about what happens next. Because this ambush, this glow-up, this transformation, it's not the ending, it's the beginning. You didn't rise to this level to plateau. You didn't transform this dramatically to maintain. You didn't become this powerful to stay stagnant. This is just the foundation. This is just the warm-up. This is just the preview of what you're capable of when you stop listening to limits and start living in possibility. They think what they're seeing now is shocking. Wait until they see what you become when you fully step into your potential without apology, without hesitation, without compromise. Your glow-up wasn't gradual because you're not a gradual person. You're an all-or-nothing force of nature. You're someone who doesn't do anything halfway. When you commit completely. When you transform thoroughly. When you evolve radically. That's not a flaw. That's your superpower. That's what makes you dangerous to people who are comfortable with mediocrity. That's what makes you intimidating to people who are satisfied with incremental change. You operate on a different frequency. You move at a different speed. You play a different game entirely. And the game you're playing now, they don't even have the rule book for. They're trying to compete with strategies that don't apply to your battlefield. They're trying to judge you by standards that don't measure your dimension. They're trying to understand you through frameworks that weren't built to contain your magnitude. You've outgrown their comprehension. You've exceeded their capacity to categorize. You've become something they have no previous experience with. And that's precisely why this feels like an ambush to them. Because you can't prepare for something you can't predict. You can't defend against something you can't see coming. Now, here's your truth. Your glow-up didn't happen to impress them. It didn't happen to prove them wrong. It didn't happen to make them regret losing you. It happened because you made a decision. A decision to stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the architect of your destiny. A decision to stop accepting the life you were living and start creating the life you deserve. A decision to stop asking for permission and start granting yourself approval. That decision, that singular moment of choosing yourself over their comfort, that was the detonation point. That was the ambush launch. That was the beginning of the end of the old you and the birth of the unstoppable you. They're going to try to take credit. They're going to claim their doubt motivated you. They're going to say their criticism pushed you. They're going to pretend their abandonment made you stronger. Don't let them. Don't give them that power. Don't allow them to rewrite their role in your story from antagonist to accidental catalyst. You did this. You made the choices. You put in the work. You fought the battles. You conquered the demons. You rose when rising felt impossible. This is your victory, your transformation, your ambush. They were just the background noise you had to learn to tune out. And tune them out you did. So completely, so thoroughly, so effectively that they're now screaming into the void, hoping you'll hear them, hoping you'll acknowledge them, hoping you'll give them the attention they once took for granted. But your frequency changed. You're operating on channels they can't access. You're living in realities they can't reach. You're existing in dimensions they can't penetrate. And that distance, that unreachable quality, that's not accidental. That's strategic. That's protective. That's necessary. Because where you're going, the energy they carry would only slow you down.